Welcome to another edition of Talk City Greensboro, produced by GTN, featuring interviews and events happening around town. It's an easy way to stay in the know while you're on the go. Subscribe to Talk City on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or SoundCloud so you can keep up with what's going on in Greensboro City government. I'm your host, Josh Johnson, and with me today, as always, my good friend and co-host, Rosemary Plyman.
So glad to be here. Hey, you know, Juneteenth, it's an annual holiday commemorating the end of slavery in the United States. It's been celebrated by Black Americans since the late 1800s, but more recently has been celebrated more widely, I think we should say. Greensboro is going to commemorate the event with a celebration the 16th through the 19th of June. Rodney Dawson, Education Curator at the Greensboro History Museum, is here with us. Hello and welcome. Glad to have you as always.
Yeah, thank you for having me again.
Thanks for being here, man. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah.
It's nice to be wanted. I don't get that every day.
Whatever. We always love you. You're welcome anytime. Come here. All right. So first, start us off with a history lesson. How did the holiday begin?
Well, it's as you know, slavery ended. However, the message was delayed in Texas, particularly Galveston, Texas. And because, you know, back then we didn't have phones. Yeah, we didn't have podcasts. We didn't have
phones,
Instagram, things like that.
Right.
And so a lot of the times the word was often delayed. And so most of the troops were concentrated on the east because that's where most of the fighting took place, in the southeast. So, but there was some fighting in the southwest, particularly Texas. And so it took time for the message to get to the people in Texas that, hey, enslavement is no longer a thing, and the formerly enslaved are now free. Now, there's a couple of reasons why that message was delayed. A lot of people said it was heard, but it took time for the troops that were concentrated in the southeast to make their way to Galveston, Texas, and enforce it. But some say a messenger was sent to let folks know that were outside of the East Coast that, hey, this message has been decreed, slavery has ended. But the messenger was killed along the way. That's been one of the myths.
Wow.
It's often said that the plantation owners made a deal. Hey, can we delay this word until the next crop so we can make some money? And so we don't know why, but it wasn't until Juneteenth, that June 19th, that the official word came through, and then the slaves were informed that you're no longer obligated.
You're free.
You're free.
Yeah. That's very interesting. I hadn't heard any of those.
Yeah, and so we don't know why, but that's really considered the official day of emancipation.
Right.
So, I mean, a lot of people are recognizing this now. It's getting the attention that it deserves. What is the History Museum doing to kind of commemorate this?
Well, you know, we started back in 2020 really pushing it. And it was off the heels of the murder of George Floyd. And the city took an initiative. I think that's even what sprung Race GSO, the city initiative.
Yep.
But the city took an initiative and said, hey, this Juneteenth is the next holiday. We're in the midst of COVID, so let's have a virtual programming. And so they program virtual shows essentially from like 9 in the morning to like 6 that afternoon. That first time it fell on a weekday. I think it fell on a Friday. Yeah. And so it got a lot of viewership. I think one video that we did with Dame's Chicken and Waffles.
That's right.
Got over 6,000 views.
Yeah.
And so because people were indoors.
Yeah.
And then in 2021, we did the same thing. And so we lined up some programming because the city naturally looked to the Greensboro History Museum as a history museum.
Sure.
To kind of put forth some programming, along with Creative Greensboro, the library, Parks and Rec. A lot of people had some input and had this programming all day. And we started concentrating on things that affected African Americans and really pushing it as not just African American history, but American history.
American history.
That's right.
One of the things I was proud of is we did, and it's still up there if you want to check it out on our YouTube channel, and even on the city's YouTube channel for Juneteenth. But we looked at the history of the Divine Nine organizations, the Black fraternities and sororities here in Greensboro. And that sprang because I was doing a face-to-face program that got canceled because of COVID. So I said, let's just do something online. And that did very well. We looked at the history of the African American church in the Triad, and we teamed up with an organization in Winston-Salem, and we traveled to churches in High Point, Greensboro, and Winston, and did a feature on that. And as I mentioned, we did something on the foods that kind of derived from Juneteenth. And so from that point, you know, this History Museum just kind of became
The
go-to. There you go.
Yeah.
And to highlight some things that were otherwise not known.
What are some of the things that are particularly interesting that you've learned through doing all this research, particularly about Greensboro and kind of its connection to not only the holiday, but the end of slavery and kind of the traditions that are really steeped in this area?
You know, I thought about it this morning. I went to the Y to work out, and I went to Hayes Taylor Y, and they have this big glass, this large glass, not walls, but windows.
Yeah.
And all the light was coming in. And what I've learned about Greensboro is just it's a light. It's a beacon of social justice. You know, a lot of things that have happened here have become the springboard for things that have taken place nationally. And at one time, Greensboro was looked upon to be the leader of social justice for the nation. You know, it's not happenstance that February 1, 1960 took place here, because it happened before. Sit-ins took place before, but there was a reason this one was able to sustain itself and took such national prominence. And Greensboro is very unique in that way. So I've learned that Greensboro as a beacon of social justice.
Yeah, and really beginning kind of after 2020, of course, and in Greensboro, and likely a lot of cities started to recognize Juneteenth as a holiday and started these commemorations after the murder of George Floyd. And it has just grown. Like, as we said, more widely known about, I think.
And I credit the city manager at the time. I'm forgetting the name.
David Parrish.
David Parrish and Larry and all of the department heads. They took the helm. They took the bull by the horn and kind of made this an issue and said, this is something we're going to consider.
Yeah.
And then they set the atmosphere for people to bring forth ideas. And like I say, they gave you room to fail. They said, if you trip up, we're here to catch you, but we want ideas. We want to explore this. And
but that's not what happens. There's no failing happening here.
Right, no failing.
I mean, learning is happening.
Right.
And that's what this is all about. Learning, commemorating, celebrating, and really knowing our neighbors a little bit more, I think is so important. What do you see as the impact on Greensboro that this is more widely known, more talked about, more celebrated?
I think education takes place, and I often give this same speech. You know, I give this speech, and people gonna say, "Man, you need to step up your academic game." I've been working on my doctorate for a long time, a lot longer than I should. But I often give this example. Education, the root word of education is educere, EDUCERE, which means to lead someone out, lead them to their fullest potential. And if you're truly educating someone, you're leading them to be the best person they can be. And Greensboro, with all its shortcomings, and I'm not saying it was a racial utopia.
No.
We had our issues here
Nowhere,
as well.
yeah.
But Greensboro did emphasize education. I think that a lot of that has to do with the Quaker influence that we have here. But it emphasized education, and therefore it was one of the few places in the South, I'm talking about in the 1930s, 40s, even a little bit before, that had infrastructure in place where African Americans wanted to come. And so you remember the Great Migration, where African Americans left the places in the South and they went west, Midwest, and north. A lot of people stopped here, because they realized, they got elementary schools there for African American kids.
Yeah.
And then in 1929, we have a high school here, Dudley High School. They have colleges, and you could just have a black middle class. And because of redlining partly, you had black middle upper class living with people of lower socioeconomic status. And so a movement was able to be sustained, and then you had allies in the Quakers and others that were able to push movements forth. And so it makes Greensboro a place where you come to be led to your fullest potential, even if you don't want to.
That's nice. I like that.
You're going to be pushed to, hey, I remember my mother, who grew up in this area, went away, participated in the social justice movements, was used to coming back to her hometown, Roundup, North Carolina, going to her favorite hot dog place where she had to go in the back. But after marching with Dr. King, she came back and told, and her daddy said, look, hey, I'm going to take you to get you a hot dog.
Go to the
and
front
they went
door.
around to the back. She said, nah, you go. I'm going to the front.
Yeah.
Good for her.
And, and so education led her out.
Yeah.
There's students at Bennett College that really, I talked to Reverend Jesse Jackson about a year and a half ago. He said the Bennett Bells are the people that sustained the sit-in movement. But they had folks at Bennett Bell that were being pushed to being led to their fullest potential. They had international students that went to women's college and that came to Bennett College. from Germany and from different parts that would come and say, this Jim Crowism that we got going on here is not right.
Yeah.
And they would encourage it. People like Ralph Johns, who owned the business here. So people were encouraged to be led to your fullest potential. And that's because Greensboro emphasized education. So not surprisingly, Greensboro is going to be on the forefront in pushing something like Juneteenth.
Yeah, but we have to keep doing it. You can't stop. Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
That's
education, as you said, leading. It's you're not there yet.
Right.
There is no there.
Right.
I mean, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how can listeners participate this year and get involved with what's going on at the History Museum or other things?
Okay. Well, and I because we had that virtual platform starting in 2020, and my master's in instructional technology, and I used to love to use technology to teach. And so when this happened, it was right up my alley. Nobody was checking for an instructional technologist before. They thought I was an IT guy in information. They wanted me to fix the internet, smartboard, projector broke down.
Did you turn off the computer and turn it back on? Yeah.
Install the projectors. But now all of a sudden they say, hey, use that stuff to teach.
Right.
And so we started doing some video programming. As I said before, we did programming on the African American Church, on the Divine Nine organizations. And then this year, immediately I started looking for ideas and what would come across, what would connect with people. So we started working on some videos, and I have keyed in on one. I don't have a name for it yet, but it's a student of mine whom I later found out after he left my classroom that he was an immigrant from Africa.
Oh, okay.
But he's an immigrant from Africa, had a treacherous journey to make it here. Lived in New York, and quickly lived in New York. It was too bad. They sent him here to live with his cousin. He ended up going to the school where I taught him. I coached him in basketball. He hit his head, had a concussion. I had to take him to the hospital, stayed at the hospital until 3 a.m, and that's where we connected.
Okay.
Because of that. And then later he found out he learned to write. He knew how to write. And when I found out he could write, we had an author come named Walter Dean Myers, who was on President Obama's commission at one time. He's since passed, but he's a renowned children's author. And he came to speak, and I said, Will, I want you to write a speech. Will wrote the speech. Walter Dean Myers was in the audience, and he stood up and he said, if I ever find out that you stop writing, I'm going to find you and I'm going to harm you. And that incentivized him. He went on to win awards nationwide.
Oh, wow.
He went on to the, I forget what they call it, but it's the aeronautics, or it's one of those, I forget the word, specialized programs at a school, like Jones has Spanish immersion.
Right. Okay.
But at Andrews, it was aviation.
Right. The aviation technology.
Right. Mm-hmm. Went on to excel there and excel in track. And he was so smart that the schools saw his GPA and said, we're not even going to waste a track scholarship on you. You can walk on the team. He chose Xavier. They said, you can get your master's here for free if you decide to stay. Wow. He broke Big East records and run in track. And they did an article on him, and that's where he admitted, I'm originally from Africa. But he was ashamed to tell it.
Wow.
Because of the bullying, the harassment.
Right, stigma,
Right. And so he's now a grad student at the University of Kentucky. Went free ride because of his academic prowess. Yeah. And but anyway, I have a video telling his story about the village that he lived in that's no bigger than this table, the room that he lived in, and then what he's doing today. And then we also I wanted to look at music. I'm a big music lover. I used to work in radio, and music's influence on politics, because we have at the museum the North Carolina Democracy exhibit that followed the Pieces of Now, the award-winning Pieces of Now, we talked about, which won big awards.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, I think won 5, but can brag on 2 right quick. Do I have time to brag on?
Sure,
Man,
go for
absolutely.
it, yeah.
We won 5 awards, but 1 we took first and second. For the use of technology on the exhibit. It was a Muse Award from the American Alliance of Museums International. The one we took gold, the second place was the Palace of Taipei. And the one we took silver, first place, was the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
And they had the plane in the museum. So that's what beat us out, that plane they got.
Well, and you can still, the exhibit isn't at the museum, but it is still online.
Still
and so
online.
It's really a moving exhibit, I think.
Very powerful.
Right.
And it's here. It's what we lived through. So I think it's important to go back and not forget. As we're kind of ending this COVID, kind of hopefully coming out of that, to look back and to see where we are. And again, that it wasn't just COVID. The George Floyd murder, and there was all this social justice coming forward, and this community and pulling together. And gosh, we need that more than ever. Yeah. Okay.
We do.
And it made it reminiscent of times of old.
Yeah.
Because I looked at the people that pushed that movement that happened here. Many of them were artists. that initiated
Yeah.
the protest, but happened to be artists of varying kinds. They were visual artists, writers, musical artists. And I started looking on the internet, and I saw all these professional videos that were done. And some of these people had Grammys, had won Grammys. And I said, man, I can do a video using some of the content that they have, and I don't have to edit it. It doesn't look like it was shot with the first iPhone, you know. And so some top-notch equipment here, and they put some money in. And I said, can I use this content? And I said, I want to study music's influence on democracy. And so I play classical piano. My mom used to make me take lessons, so I haven't named it, but I'm going to do one on classical music and democracy. And there's a lot of content out there germane to our state. And then the other one, don't steal it, it's called Democracy.
I like it, yeah.
And so with the first one I started
Copyrighted already.
The first one that I started working on was hip hop and democracy.
Yeah.
So we did a 2-part series. And so we did one where we talked to some local professors that teach a hip hop class, some of these artists that participated in the social justice movement, and their take on explaining democracy in the hip hop community and how much hip hop influenced it. And that led to a part 2 where we're looking at, and because I moderated the discussion for the Chamber of Commerce, and this young lady chimed in with a question and hit off a relationship with her. And I said, I need to connect you with this person, and we need to get together and talk and get people from all demographics that are involved in the hip hop community talking about this subject. So it's LGBTQ, it's Latinx, it's Asian American, it's African American, and we're the people talking about hip hop and democracy. And it really, the part 2 concentrates on the carceral system, which I wasn't truly aware of. And so there's a part 1 and a part 2 hip hop and democracy video that we're going to feature for Juneteenth, talking about that. And then every year we do a living history where we hire actors and actresses to come in and portray different people. So you walk through the museum, and where there's an exhibit about Justice Henry Fry, there might be someone dressed like him that'll pop up and may scare you and say, hello, I'm Chief Justice Henry Fry, and tell you about his or her life, whomever it may be. And this lady attended, and she says, my name is so-and-so, Shirley Simmons, and I'm known around here as the Black historian. And I got to talking, and I said, you need to come on my podcast. And so we got to meeting, and I said, where would you like to meet? And she says, well, one of my libraries. And I said, which one? She said, McGirt Horton. So we went there, we talked to McGirt Horton, and said, hey, can we film something here? And we filmed it. Mayor Pro Tem Yvonne Johnson was there. A lot of folks showed up, packed out the McGirt Horton Library. GTN, you all came and recorded it for us. And so that's going to be part of the feature for Juneteenth, and she entitled it Past, Present, and Future. And this is by Shirley Simmons, who grew up in Greensboro, was a chauffeur for Bennett College, and met people like Coretta Scott King, Rosa Parks. And she talks about the former past doctors that used to be here, like Dr. Simpkins and Dr. Blunt, Pillar, a school where she attended, and what it is now, and just the changes throughout Greensboro and the aspirations that we have for the future. And it turned out pretty nicely, and so we're going to run that for Juneteenth as well.
So I love this. Juneteenth is really a launching board to talk about history, to talk about American history, to talk about Greensboro history, to talk about people and their stories, because that's what history is. It's people.
Sharing
it's stories. Yeah.
That's right.
And it's all of us, and we're all connected.
Exactly. And that's my job. I think our job is to help people assist in sharing their story.
And to find those connection points.
Right. And I have a passion for doing it for what I call marginalized, underrepresented, undervalued communities. And just a quick plug, we're doing something with Victoria Milstein and Mitchell Summers on Holocaust education that should be coming up soon. But on that day, we do have some in-person programming as well. So last year we did a bike tour where we went to Green Book sites. And so a lot of people showed up, and we got on our bikes, and we rode around the 4 or 5 different Green Book sites, and ended up at the Magnolia House and had a great lunch.
A good box lunch.
Box lunch.
Nice.
And this year we're doing a bike tour, and I was trying to pull up the official title, but my phone died. But we're going to historic sites that deal with democracy.
Okay.
So we might go by Justice Fry's office.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be about a 4 to 5 mile trek on the bike. We're going to make about 4 or 5 stops and throughout downtown. And that's going to be the Juneteenth bike tour, Petals and Politics.
Nice.
And so we'll kick it off at the museum. It's going to start at 12. You have to register. You can go on our website, greensborohistory.org, hit events, and you can register. It's free to attend. Just bring your bike.
Perfect.
And that'll go from about 12 to 2 o'clock. And then we've teamed up with the public library, Greensboro Public Library, and Parks and Rec, and the museum for a Juneteenth family event in our Richardson Park, the park area adjacent to the museum.
Fantastic.
And so that'll take place from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. So
Rodney, do you sleep ever? I'm just wondering.
Well, look at my eyes.
I'm looking. You look great.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really an amazing event, and you've just worked so hard. And I just want to thank you personally for just making all these connections and this history, and just letting us meet all these people who are, our neighbors, our friends, are part of our history as well.
Yeah,
So,
it's a special place.
Certainly
Yes, it
so.
is.
Yeah.
Hey, you can find out more about the History Museum's Juneteenth events by going to greensborohistory.org and clicking the events page. Also, follow local Juneteenth events on Facebook at Juneteenth GSO Fest.
Rodney, thanks for coming. It's always a pleasure to have you, man.
And thank you for having me here.
Stay tuned in weekly by subscribing to Talk City Greensboro on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. And don't forget, you can download Talk City from SoundCloud.
Thanks so much for listening to Talk City. If you like what you hear, please share it with your friends. You can find out a lot more about Greensboro happenings by watching GTN, your official source for news and information about the city of Greensboro. GTN is available on Spectrum Channel 13
AT&T Uverse Channel 99.
and North State Channel 31.
GTN also streams live on Roku and the city's website
At greensboro-nc.gov.